In the last video we learned about Angular's ng-repeat directive. In this video we're going to take a look at the ng-click directive and how we can use events to create some really powerful interfaces using Angular. So I have exactly the same code that I had in the ng-repeat example here in front of me, but I'm going to add the functionality to add a person to this list from on the page. To do this we're going to need some inputs that are our new name and our new age, and then a button that we can click that will add the person to the list. So I'm going to create that bit of DOM now. I'm going to create it inside the scope of our original list controller. You may have noticed on the last example that the search model was actually outside the scope of our list controller, but we could still access it inside. That's because Angular has the concept of a global scope, which is what we've seen in the earlier examples where we didn't have any controllers. The search model is on what's called the root scope, and because the root scope is a parent of the list controller scope, we could get at the search model from inside the list controller. But this time I am going to create the new functionality inside the list controller scope. So I'll first create a label that will be for the name input, and then an input with the model of new name. Then I'll add a break and then duplicate this so we can create another model. This will be for the age, and I'm going to change the type of the input to be a number. This just adds a little bit of user interface that's useful. And then update this to be the new age. So now we have two new models in the ng controller scope, the list controller scope, new name and new age. Lastly, we're going to need another break and then the button that will do the adding. So I guess what we want to happen is for me to be able to put in a name here and an age and click add, and then it adds it to the list and clears these fields. To do that we'll need to listen for clicks on the add button. Angular provides us with an ng-click directive that lets us do just this. A bit like in the ng-model directive, Angular evaluates the contents of the ng-click directive against the scope and carries out whatever JavaScript is contained in there. So I'm going to write add in there and call it like a function. Add doesn't exist as a function in our scope, but we can create it now. So I'll say scope.add is a function, which means we can call it from anywhere inside our scope and carry out an action. In the case of ng-click, it knows that all it needs to do is call it and let us do the rest. So the next thing I need to do is add the new person to the list of people. So I'm going to push a new object into the scope.people array. The name will be the new name taken from the scope, new name, and the age will be again the scope, new age. These variables will have been set when we've typed in here. And finally I'm going to clear these variables after we've used them. So I'm going to set new name to an empty string, and the same with new age. So let's try it out. I'll add a new person, let's say they're called Max, and give them an age of 10. When I click add, you can see that Max is added to our list and the name and age fields are cleared. Let's add Laura. She is 25, and I'll add her, and you see Laura's again added to the list. And we can search these because Angular will search the updated list, Max and Laura. So that gives you an idea of what it is ng-click can do. You can put some JavaScript in here and it will evaluate it against the scope. So in this case I'm running a function. Interestingly, I could actually put the resetting of the variables into the ng-click attribute. So I'll say new name and set it to an empty string, and new age, and also set it to an empty string, right here in the ng-click directive. As I said, it's just JavaScript evaluated against the scope in which it sits, in this case the ng controller list. If I remove the resetting that we're doing inside the controller and add a new person, say Laura 25, add, you can see the variables are cleared and Laura's added to the list. I'm going to set these back the way they were for the moment. So that's all well and good, but what about passing parameters to these functions? Well, to do this I'm going to show you how we would remove a person from this list. And to do that, I'm just going to add one thing to our list, a button with an X in it. Inside ngRepeat, Angular introduces a couple of new variables that you can use to work out what item you're operating on. One of these is the $index variable that tells us the index in the array that we're currently operating on. So I'll add an ngClick directive to the button and then call remove, which will be a function that we'll add to the scope, and pass it the index of the item we're currently operating on. So for each of these, in this case it will be index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to add this function to the scope. So scope remove is a function, and it's going to get past that index parameter. Then we'll use the splice method, the array splice method, to remove the person from the people array. So I'll say people.splice from the index one user, or one person. So now I should be able to just click this button and it will remove people from the list. And so it does. I can add someone back. Let's add Laura again, 25, and then remove her again. And you can see we can completely clear the list and add people back again. I'll just refresh that page so we get the people back. Angular provides some other variables that we can use inside ngRepeat. So in this case, I'm going to add a couple of messages to our list that will demonstrate these. The first one is $first. So I'm going to add a span that says first to each of these. But we only want this to appear on the actual first item in the list. So I'm going to say ngShow, and only when we are on the first item in the array. And you can see that first appears next to Tom, who is the first one in the list. I'm going to duplicate this and use another one, which is last. So I'll say last, and currently it's only appearing on the last, but we swap out this for $last, and now it's only going to appear on the last. There's another one, which is $middle, which will appear on any of the middle items in the array, which in this case is everything in between our first and last. So here you can see Angular has provided a few variables that mean we can do some interesting things with data appearing on each item in the list. You could use this, for example, to style your elements. So I'll show you how we might do that. I'm going to add a class to our button, and I'm going to say first dash, and then use the templating variable that I can use inside the class as well as just as text, and the first. This means this button now has a class of first dash true, and you can see that here, first dash true. Now in my CSS I can say we're going to style first dash true and give it a background color red. So now we're styling something in the first item in the array according to a variable Angular is providing to us inside ngRepeat. Another thing we might want to do is find the length of the people array. As the templating variables are just JavaScript, we can use the JavaScript length property to show the length. So I'll add a new span here. So there are people.length in the list. I'll just add the word people. There are 5 people in the list, and if I add Laura again and her age, then we can see it updates, so there are 6 people. And you'll also notice that our first and last updated. If I delete Tom, then Jeffrey becomes the first. If I delete Jeffrey, Dan becomes the first. And if I remove Laura, then Peter becomes the last. And I remove Peter, then we only have the first and last. And I remove David, and you'll see that Dan gets first and last, and we get 1 people in the list. So that's an introduction to ngClick calling functions in your scope like add and remove, and passing them parameters like the index of the item we're operating on, and also some of the variables that Angular provides to us inside the ngRepeat directive. In the next video we're going to look at monitoring for changes in models using the ngChange directive.